All right, here we are. This is part 4 of the Dr. Phil show as it relates to George Zimmerman. And this is the first show. He's got 2. So let's go ahead and get started on this section.
Is he a racist?
Is he a racist? This is going to be good. Yeah, I can hear the answer now. Yeah, he is. You can tell he is because he goes around shooting black kids. Come on. What a stupid question.
Absolutely not. No. Is he a cowboy vigilante?
Yeah, that's what it is. Cowboy Vigilante. That's the one.
Absolutely not. He's a peaceful person, a loving person. That's why when we heard this story that it happened, I have other friends that I would have said, well, I'm just not sure whether it was, something they might have done or might not have done. When it came to George, it was more of a shock to us because the last thing he would have done was do anything. You say that he is a nice, loving, sweet guy. I don't know him, so I've not met him.
Well, I'm glad you said that and that you admit that you don't know him. But now you're going to continue and say all the points that you've dug up that make you think that he is not those things, a nice, loving, sweet guy. So Dr. Phil here is going to tell us that in 2005, George was a bad guy because he defended his friend from some people that were attacking him in a bar. There was no way for George to know that those guys attacking his friend happened to be police officers. There was no way to know that. And that's why George doesn't have a record concerning that. And that's why the judge let him off with a little slap on the wrist. Because believe me, if you assault police officers, you're going to prison if you did it and you did something wrong. The only reason the judge let him off on that was because he knows these guys didn't identify themselves as police officers. And George had every right to defend his friend. And he's also going to tell you about George's girlfriend, the chick that was so out of control that she tried to get a restraining order, and then later on George had to get one against her. I mean, obviously, she wasn't thinking seriously about that restraining order because she was bugging him afterwards. And there was one other thing. I guess we'll talk about that after we get past here.
We, as many people, have researched this guy. Since '04, he's called the police over 46 times.
And that somehow is a bad thing. He called the police over 46 times since 2004, which is 8 years. He called the police. Well, big deal. You would think that's a good thing, somebody that calls the police. Or do we have any evidence that that was a bad thing? Maybe he would tell us right now. I mean, common sense would say if that's a bad thing, you're going to tell us right now. You're going to say, yeah, the cops gave us a long list and said this guy's out of control. He's always calling us. But that's not going to happen. He's not going to tell us anything negative about that. So you must assume if he called the cops that many times, he's definitely a concerned citizen.
In '05, he was arrested for resisting an officer with violence and battery of a law enforcement officer.
And I've already explained that. He was defending his friend. The officers weren't in uniform, and they were not identifying themselves. George was required to help his friend.
Felonies, which were ultimately reduced, so apparently pled down, and then ultimately...
Reduced? Reduced means, you say pled down, reduced? That's just lies, because reduced or pled down would be like, well, they were felonies, and then he got misdemeanors. Well, they weren't misdemeanors either. There was no charge left. All the judge did was ask him to attend a class. A class. That's not reduced. There was no that was hard. I wouldn't count that as a punishment. The cop didn't know George. He wasn't sure if he was angry or what. So he just said, hey, go through this anger management, and that way it makes it look good for the cops, even though they were out of control and the judge knew it.
Completely because he went to alcohol education program.
And again, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. It had nothing to do with alcohol program. It was the anger management, and George's friend corrects him there.
Yeah, so that's not who you're describing. This is a peachy guy. He's loving. He's caring.
What do you mean that's not who he's describing? What did you say about him that shows that it's not true? I mean, the fact that he was defending his friend, that shows that he's not loving and peachy keen guy. You're full of crap. If you're his friend, you'd be sure glad that he was there defending you. That's what good people do. They defend their friends. You're ridiculous. And this guy's supposed to be a psychologist? What kind of psychologist tells their friends that they're not supposed to defend one another?
He's a gentle spirit. In '05, he apparently is resisting an officer with violence and battery of a law enforcement officer.
Well, why don't you say this now, Dr. Phil? Go ahead, tell the good audience that these guys weren't in uniform. There was no way for him to know that they were officers. Go ahead, tell your audience that there was no way, they didn't identify themselves. So there was no way for him to know that they were officers. Why don't you say that? You know why you won't say that? Because you're a liar. See, people that leave out specific facts that are good for the opposition, they're liars. Like the judge or the prosecutor that left out all the exculpatory facts of this case. That's we call that lying. See, and you, shiny head there that I'm looking at on the screen, you are definitely a liar.
An '07 domestic abuse report filed by ex-fiancé as she requested a restraining order, as did he against her in '08.
Well, at least he pointed that out. First, she requests one, and the judge always gives it because you know what? The judge says, look, if you guys got a problem, just stay apart. And never did he say George broke that requirement by the court to stay away from that girl. Never does he say that. Then he says that George gets one against her, that apparently she was bugging him. But, you know, never does he say that there was a problem. There is no evidence that George ever hurt anybody or did anything wrong. But he's going to bring this up just to stir it and to make it look bad for him. I'm sure if I looked into the good doctor's background and did a little bit of PI, I think we could find out a few things that might not be too perfect on his background. What do you think?
His former Arab-American work colleague complained formally alleging serial hazing by George across several months.
And now here's the thin-skinned coworker, the guy that couldn't take the ribbing that everybody was given to him and to other people. Everybody especially male coworkers, we rib each other, we make jokes about each other. This guy, listen, you got to listen to his voice. He sounds just like that guy. I can't even remember the name of the movie, but it was the one with the Arab, and it's hilarious. The guy that makes fun and the movie's not all that great, but the little few parts on it are really funny, and George made some fun of that, and so did others. And you know, the guy didn't like it, and he took it wrong apparently, but he didn't tell George that. I mean, George just thought it was all in fun. So you know what I say? If it bugs you that much, you need to work with the girls. You know, guys rib each other. It's just the way guys are. You know, we joke and we pull each other's chain. You know, girls, they can't do that. They kind of do. They do different things, and I'm not going to go into that.
I never heard that.
Yeah, okay, well, I'll tell you about it. He said it included pranks and ethnic jokes, and that he impersonated a terrorist character.
Because that's what the movie was about. There was a terrorist character, or a funny movie about a guy that was making jokes about that, and that's all it was.
That doesn't square up with the George you described. I'm not saying people don't change.
Sure.
But I'm saying it doesn't square up with the guy you're...
That's because you don't know George, and it doesn't square up with your opinion of what a nice guy is. To me, somebody who's joking around in a workplace, that is a nice guy. And the fact that some people take it wrong or get insulted, well, you know, that happens in real life. Even nice guys sometimes insult people. I consider myself a nice guy, and you should see some of the comments on my videos. Apparently, some people don't think that my comments are all that great. But does that mean that I'm not a nice guy? Does that mean that I wouldn't help you out? if you needed it, that I wouldn't jump in the river and pull you to safety, even if you were somebody that I disagreed with? Of course not. You can't say that, and you don't know. You don't know me. And this guy doesn't know George. If he knew George, he'd know. I mean, if you do 20 minutes worth of research, just go in and look at the research that the media had done on George and find out the real truth. Then you could say, this guy is a really good guy. How could you be so mean to him? He's how can you suggest that he's racist when he's taking care of black kids and doing community work and helping people out? How can you say that? I mean, it should not ever roll off of an educated man's tongue.
Well, the incident of the battery of a law enforcement officer, as George described that to me, they were plainclothes police officers near a college campus, and when a friend of his was being manhandled by these plainclothes police officers, he got involved. He was grabbing people, pulling them off of him, and they turned to him and they immediately arrested him for battery on a law enforcement officer. And because when you put your hands on him...
But it is interesting that he's in another fight on the street.
It's interesting that he's on another fight on the street. So what's that tell me? That if you get in one fight, if somebody attacks your friends and you try to help your friend, and it turns out that they're police officers, of course you don't continue once you find out they're police officers, but you get arrested anyway. But now once that's happened, you can never defend your life again, because somebody like Dr. Phil is going to say, this he's a violent guy. Look, he's already been in a struggle before. So now he's in a struggle again. This means that he's guilty. He needs to be in prison for the rest of his life.
And here he is in another fight on the street. This time he's armed and somebody gets dead.
Absolutely.
Somebody's armed and somebody gets dead. Isn't that funny? Yeah, well, it's a fortunate thing that George was the one that was armed, and it's a fortunate thing that the attacker was the one that ended up dead. And basically, that's the reason for having guns. You know, typically people have guns on their person so that they can defend themselves. You know, normal stuff.
He and I had talked about that, and that was one of the topics that he had gotten into a place in his life to where he said, you know what, I don't want to frequent like on Friday nights or Saturday nights going out to clubs with my friends and such, and I don't wish to.
You know, he's trying to defend George, but it's not very helpful. Listen, George was perfectly in his right to do what he did. And when he was there with his friend and trying to help his friend, that was perfectly in the right thing. It was the right thing to do. So, you know, don't defend him on that part. The fact that he used to go out to bars and stuff like all of us, or the majority of us did when we were younger, and then we get older and we grow out of that. And that's what George was doing. He's going through the process of growing up. He finally got to the point where, look, I don't want to go to the bars anymore. But that had nothing to do with what happened that night. And it had nothing to do with what happened when George got beat up by Trayvon. So, you know, why defend George in these cases? It doesn't make any sense. Listen, George was in the right when he defended his friend. George was in the right when he got rid of his old girlfriend because she was out of control. Why are we defending him here? And why do you defend him in the face of a supposed doctor who doesn't have a clue about George, but sits here and makes judgments and pontificates?
He stopped doing these things, and his life changed completely. He started saving money. He started doing, and with that money, him and Shelley have done nothing but mentor inner city youth and be the big brother and big sister of those people.
So he tells him what he's done. He's saving his money. He's not going out and hanging out at bars anymore. You know, him and Shelley are focusing their lives. They're helping, mentoring young black kids and stuff. Do you think that at that point the good doctor would turn and say, you know, let's look at that. Let's just focus for a minute on those things that he did. So let's just see what he says.
Model for him?
He says so. I don't know how qualified I am to be a role model for anybody.
And you said that you would die for the Zimmerman.
So instead, he immediately says, are you a role model for George? He's like, I don't think so. And then, he says, didn't you say you would die for George? Well, we know where he's headed with that. He's leading him. He's trying to get him to say, that you were, we can't trust anything you say because you're a friend of George and you would die for him. If you would die for him, you would lie for him. And that's where he's trying to go. But you'll see George's friend is just a little too quick for that.
Even if it meant just protecting him for another week or another month, is what you said, actually.
Absolutely. But I wouldn't lie for him. That will never come across me.
So that pretty much nipped the good doctor's bud right there. Click. And that was the end of that conversation. You won't hear another word about that. Boom. I guess he's going to have to find something else to talk about.
Honor, these things I hold so dear in my life.
In all of your mentoring, modeling, and talking to George Zimmerman, did you ever tell him 10 things to do, 3 things to do, 5 things to do?
Yeah. I can hear it now. He said, if someone's trying to beat you to death and trying to kill you, you got 10 things you need to do before you pull out your gun. Number 1, you need to try to talk to him. Hey, buddy, why are you doing this? I'm a nice guy, and I'd like to talk to you. No, that's not working. Next thing we should try to do, instead of talking to him, try giving him a little pat on the back. A little friendly pat, like, hey, how's it going? Come on. 2 things, 3 things. What? No. When you verify that the guy on top of you and is not letting you up wants to kill you, that's when you've made your decision that you got to get out of this at whatever way possible, at the risk of the guy's death.
You have to draw that weapon.
It was never a breakdown like that. We never really had a.
I see at the shooting range. What I'm saying is, did you ever say, stay out of situations where you don't get painted into a corner and have to draw that gun?
Always.
Don't follow somebody if you're not supposed to. Watch and observe. Don't engage. And number 1 self-defense, like Michael used to tell me, number 1 self-defense, boy, is run.
Kind of hard to run when you're on your back and somebody's sitting on top of you, pounding your face and banging your head onto the concrete, isn't it there, buddy? It's kind of sad, really.
Run. Get the hell away. Just don't be macho about this. He said if they've got a gun, a knife, a bat, or a rock, or they just look bad, run. Did you ever have those kind of conversations with him, that it is a failure to pull that gun and pull the trigger?
And that is the point where, this really shows the ignorance of this man. Fortunately, he's a psychologist and he's not a legal expert or anything else. But his last statement, each time I say it's the most ignorant statement, I think he's outdone himself here. That it's a failure to pull out your gun and use it. That's just ignorant. The failure is to not pull out your gun and use it when required. That is a failure. And, I would explain that, but I think people that understand that already know, and those who don't understand it will never know. And that's the end of this clip. So I'm going to go ahead and leave it here. It was good talking to you guys. Talk to you later.